Princess stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive towers of the Galactic Defense Academy. The buildings reached so high into the sky that their tops disappeared into the clouds. This was Nexus Prime, the most important military training center in the galaxy. Only the best warriors from the strongest species came here. She adjusted her royal uniform and walked toward the main entrance. Other cadets moved around her, and she could see why this place had such a fearsome reputation. A group of warriors passed by, their black scales gleaming and their razor-sharp claws clicking on the metal floor. Each one stood over 8 feet tall and moved like deadly hunting machines. Near the registration area, several cadets floated in perfect formation. Their crystalline bodies caught the light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. They were known across the galaxy as master tacticians. Their crystal minds could process battle information faster than any computer. Smiled with satisfaction. These were the kind of beings she expected to train alongside. As a princess of the Dominion Coalition, she deserved to learn from the galaxy's apex predators and warrior races. Princess of the Dominion Coalition, she announced to the registration officer, a small blue alien with multiple eyes. The officer checked his list and frowned. Squadron Omega, he said, handing her a data pad with her assignment. Smile faded. Squadron Omega was not where she expected to be placed. Everyone knew that Squadron Alpha contained the elite cadets, while Squadron Beta held the promising secondary candidates. Omega was much further down the list. She walked to the squadron meeting area, her mood darkening. The cadets gathered there were not what she had hoped to see. There were a few species she recognized as mid-level fighters, some diplomatic assignments from peaceful worlds, and several beings she had never seen before. "You must be the princess," said a voice behind her. Turned to see a creature that barely reached her shoulder. He had pale skin, dark hair, and wore the same basic uniform as everyone else. His build was neither impressive nor intimidating. He looked almost fragile compared to the warriors she had seen earlier. "I am Princess," she said formally, "and you are?" The small being replied with what appeared to be a friendly expression. "I'm from Earth, just a trainee like everyone else here." Had never heard of Earth. The name meant nothing to her, which probably meant it was an unimportant world with weak inhabitants. She gave a brief nod and looked around for more impressive. "Attention, cadets," the voice boomed across the assembly area. Instructor General strode into view. The old warrior was a legend throughout the galaxy. His gray skin was covered in battle scars, and his 4 arms each bore weapons from different worlds he had conquered. Even the Alphas showed respect when he passed. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," began. "You are here because your governments believe you have potential. Some of you come from warrior races with proud military traditions. Others come from worlds that contribute to the galaxy in different ways." His eyes swept over Squadron Omega, and felt that his gaze lingered dismissively on their group. "Your final examination will separate the true warriors from the pretenders," he continued. "In 6 months, you will enter the Devourer's Maze. This is a pocket dimension where we keep the galaxy's most dangerous predators for training purposes. You will survive there for 72 hours with minimal equipment." Excited murmurs ran through the crowd. The Devourer's Maze was famous throughout military circles. It was said that only the strongest species had ever achieved perfect scores there. "The Empire has never lost a cadet in the maze," noted, nodding toward a group of the massive predators. "The collective maintains the highest tactical efficiency ratings. The ethereal castes hold records for supernatural combat." His gaze moved to the human section, where stood quietly among a small group of similar beings. "And some species," he said with what might have been amusement, "provide interesting data points." Several of the elite cadets chuckled at this comment, found herself wondering why Earth had been invited to send representatives at all. The first week of training began immediately. Combat simulations ran 18 hours per day. Physical conditioning pushed every species to their biological limits. Tactical exercises tested strategic thinking under extreme pressure. Excelled in most areas, as she had expected. Her royal training and enhanced genetics gave her significant advantages over typical members of her species. She consistently ranked in the top 10% of all cadets. The warriors dominated the physical challenges. Watching them move was like watching death itself take shape. Their natural weapons could cut through battle armor, and their reflexes were faster than most species could even perceive. They controlled the tactical simulations. Their crystalline minds worked in perfect harmony, creating strategies that lesser species could barely understand. And the other humans performed adequately in most areas. They were not the weakest cadets, but they were far from the strongest, usually finished somewhere in the middle of every ranking, competent but unremarkable. Persistent little creatures, commented one day. The massive alpha was the undisputed leader of the elite cadets. They keep trying even when they know they cannot win. Persistence without power is just stubbornness, replied. She had been working hard to gain acceptance among the top performers. Happened to be passing by when she said this. He glanced at her with those strange, small eyes of his. For just a moment, she thought she saw something unexpected in his expression. Not hurt or anger, but something like curiosity. Then he smiled slightly and continued walking. The princess dismissed the moment from her mind. In 6 months, they would enter the Devourer's maze. There, natural order would assert itself. The apex predators would prove their worth, the tactical geniuses would demonstrate their superiority, and the lesser species would learn their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. She had no way of knowing that was already preparing for something entirely different than what she expected. The training became more intense as weeks passed. Combat simulations were replaced with real sparring matches, where cadets fought each other with weapons designed to cause pain but not permanent damage. The medical bay stayed busy treating cuts, burns, and broken bones. Watched the matches carefully. She needed to understand her competition if she wanted to rank among the elite. The warriors fought like living weapons. Their claws moved so fast they blurred, and their powerful muscles could crush armor plating. They worked together like parts of a single mind, creating formations that trapped their opponents perfectly. Today we will have cross-species combat trials, announced Instructor General. You will be paired with opponents from different backgrounds. This will test your ability to adapt to unfamiliar fighting styles. Names appeared on the large display screen. Was matched against a tactical specialist. Was paired with the alpha who had never lost a sparring match. Interesting, she murmured to herself. The instructors were clearly setting up the human to be humiliated, outweighed by at least 300 pounds and possessed natural weapons that could cut through steel. The princess fought her own match first. They moved with mechanical precision, but royal combat training had taught her how to disrupt crystal formation patterns. She won after a difficult 15-minute battle. Then it was time for versus. The human entered the sparring ring wearing standard protective gear. He looked even smaller standing across from the massive. His black scales rippled as his muscles tensed for combat. His claws extended to their full deadly length. This should be over quickly, commented Ra, one of the other elite cadets. The match began with charging forward like a living missile. His claws swept toward in patterns that would have shredded most opponents instantly, but was not where the claws struck. He had moved just enough to avoid the attack while staying close enough to counterattack. Struck back with what looked like desperate moves. He grabbed pieces of training equipment and threw them at. He rolled under tables and jumped over barriers. To most observers, it appeared he was simply running away and hopping to get lucky. But notice something strange. Every time moved, he seemed to be studying his reactions. When the turned left to follow him was already moving right. when anticipated a right turn went straight forward. The match lasted much longer than anyone expected, managed to land several hits with training weapons, though they barely scratched armored hide. More importantly, he avoided being seriously injured despite this overwhelming advantages. Eventually, superior strength and speed won the match. But when it ended, the alpha predator was breathing hard and had several small cuts on his arms and legs. He looked confused and slightly angry. Lucky growled as he left the ring, but his eyes kept returning to with an expression that might have been uncertainty. Cleaned his equipment calmly and walked away without saying anything. He did not seem disappointed by his loss. The human lasted 18 minutes, Ra observed. Most cadets last less than 5 against. Persistence, replied dismissively. It means nothing without real skill. But privately, she found herself thinking about the match. There had been moments when seemed to know what would do before the did it. That should not have been possible for such a weak species. The next major test came during field exercises. Squadron Omega was sent to navigate through an asteroid field while under simulated enemy fire. The goal was to reach a checkpoint on the other side without being shot down by automated defense systems. Most cadets relied on their ship's advanced computers to plot safe courses. The ships moved in perfect mathematical formations that minimized their exposure to enemy fire. The vessels used raw speed and armor to smash through obstacles. Flew her royal fighter with skill and precision. Her ship systems were the most advanced in the squadron, and her training had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenge. She reached the checkpoint in good time with minimal damage. Then she noticed that had arrived first. His ship was not impressive. It looked like a basic training vessel with standard equipment. Nothing about it should have allowed him to outperform the elite cadets with their superior technology and natural abilities. "How did you get here so fast?" she asked him over the communication channel. Was checking his ship systems methodically. "I took a shortcut," he said simply. "What shortcut?" "The navigation computers show only one viable path through the asteroid field." "I went through the anomaly zone," replied. "The one marked as impassable on all the charts." Stared at her display screen. The anomaly zone was a region where multiple asteroids created overlapping gravity fields. No computer could calculate a safe path through it because the gravitational forces changed too quickly and unpredictably. "That is impossible," she said. "No navigation system can plot a course through random gravitational fluctuations." "I did not use the navigation system," said. "I could feel where the gravity currents were flowing." This made no sense too. Feeling gravity currents was not something any known species could do. Gravity was a force that required instruments to measure accurately. But ship showed no damage from gravitational stress. Somehow, he had flown through forces that should have torn his vessel apart. When Instructor General reviewed the exercise results, his expression was thoughtful. He pulled up his flight path on the main display. The route showed impossible turns through areas where the gravity field should have crushed any ship attempting to pass through them. "Cadet," he said, "explain your navigation method." Stood at attention. "I watched how the asteroids moved and followed the spaces between the gravity wells," he said, "like swimming in a river with strong currents." "And you learned this technique where?" "Basic pilot training on Earth," replied. "We practice in the gravity fields around our gas giants." His 4 eyes narrowed. "Your species regularly flies through gravitational anomalies for training." "Yes, sir. Jupiter and Saturn create good practice conditions for new pilots." The Instructor General was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a note in his personal files and dismissed the cadets. That night found herself thinking about and his planet. A world that used gravitational anomalies for basic pilot training suggested a species with very unusual capabilities. Perhaps the humans were not as weak as they appeared. but she pushed these thoughts aside. In a few months, they would enter the Devourer's maze. There, facing the galaxy's most dangerous predators, natural order would reassert itself. Raw power and proven hunting instincts would determine who survived and who failed. She still had no idea how wrong she was about what those predators would fear most. The day finally arrived when Squadron Omega would enter the Devourer's maze, stood with her at the portal entrance, checking her equipment one last time. Each cadet carried basic survival gear, a simple weapon, and one emergency beacon. Using the beacon meant automatic failure and immediate extraction from the maze. The portal itself looked like a tear in reality. Through it, she could see a twisted landscape that seemed to change every time she blinked. Mountains became valleys, forests turned into deserts, and the sky shifted between different colors. The maze exists in a pocket dimension, explained Instructor General. Time and space work differently inside. The environment will challenge you in ways your home worlds never could. You have 72 hours to survive and reach the extraction point. He looked at each cadet seriously. The creatures inside are real. They can kill you. The Academy has lost students in the maze before. If you are not completely certain you can handle this test, activate your beacon now and leave. None of the cadets moved. Even the weakest among them had come too far to quit now. Remember, continued, only apex predators have achieved perfect scores in the maze. The Empire, the Collective, and the ethereal castes have produced legends here. Everyone else has simply tried to survive long enough to pass. His gaze lingered on for a moment. Some species provide interesting data points. One by one, the cadets stepped through the portal, felt reality twist around her as she entered the maze. The sensation was like being pulled through thick liquid while falling in all directions at once. She found herself standing on a rocky plateau under a purple sky. Strange plants with metallic leaves grew from cracks in the stone. In the distance, she could see other cadets materializing in different locations across a landscape that normal geography. Immediately, she began implementing royal survival protocols. First, establish a secure position. Second, locate other friendly forces. Third, identify threats and opportunities. The cadets had materialized near each other and were already forming hunting packs. Their natural predator instincts made them perfectly suited for this environment. The group was systematically clearing their area of smaller threats, working with the ruthless efficiency that had made their species feared across the galaxy. The cadets had created a defensive formation on a crystalline outcropping. Their combined mental abilities allowed them to detect approaching dangers before other species even knew threats existed. They would be nearly impossible to surprise or overwhelm. Gathered several mid-level cadets around her and established a command post in a defensible position. Her royal tactical training served her well in organizing the group's resources and planning their movements. As the first day progressed, they encountered the maze's initial challenges. Void wraiths emerged from shadows, creatures made of living darkness that drained energy from anything they touched. The group fought them using coordinated royal guard tactics, maintaining formation while focusing their fire on one target at a time. The shadow stalkers came next, predators that could become nearly invisible and strike from any angle. The packs hunted them with predatory precision, using their enhanced senses to track the creatures even when they couldn't be seen. Quantum parasites attacked the position, attempting to disrupt their crystalline structures, but they simply reconfigured their formations, creating geometric patterns that the parasites couldn't penetrate. By the end of the first day, most cadets were working in groups and following predictable patterns. The strong species dominated their territories, while the weaker ones formed defensive alliances. But was alone. Spotted him during her group's evening reconnaissance. He had made camp beside a small fire in an area that should have been extremely dangerous. The bones scattered around his campsite belonged to creatures she didn't recognize. They were much larger than anything her group had encountered. "That's impossible," whispered Ra, who was part of his command group. "No single cadet should be able to survive alone in that sector." Appeared to be cooking some kind of meat over his fire. When he noticed their observation, he waved casually and offered to share his food. The gesture was so normal and friendly that it seemed completely out of place in the deadly environment of the maze. His group declined and moved on, but she found herself wondering what kinds of creatures had fought to collect those bones, and why he seemed so calm and relaxed while sitting alone in one of the most dangerous training environments in the galaxy. During the night, something massive moved through the forest. His group heard footsteps that shook the ground and made their equipment rattle. Whatever was walking out there was larger than anything they had trained to fight. The packs went completely silent. These were creatures that feared nothing, but even they recognized when something more dangerous was hunting in their territory. The formations dimmed their crystalline glow and shifted into defensive patterns that they had never used during training. But the giant footsteps passed by his camp without stopping. In fact, they seemed to go around his area entirely, as if avoiding something that made even apex predators uncomfortable. On the second day, the real tests began. The maze released creatures that cadets had been warned about but never expected to face. These were the predators that hunting species told stories about to frighten their children. Blood titans emerged from underground caverns, creatures the size of buildings with hides that could stop military-grade weapons. Psychic leeches attacked minds directly, creating hallucinations and madness in their victims. Phase hunters could step between dimensions, making them almost impossible to fight with conventional weapons. This group fought desperately against a pair of blood titans. Their weapons barely scratched the creature's armored hides. Only by working together and using the environment to their advantage did they manage to drive the beasts away. The pack struggled against the phase hunters. Their natural predator abilities were useless against enemies that could attack from dimensions they couldn't perceive. Even they had difficulty with the psychic leeches. Their crystalline minds, normally their greatest advantage, made them more vulnerable to mental attacks than other species. But continued to move through the maze alone, glimpsed him several times during the second day. He never seemed to be fighting anything. Instead, he walked calmly through areas where other cadets had been forced to retreat. More strangely, the dangerous predators seemed to avoid him. When a blood titan charged toward his position, it stopped just short of reaching him and turned away. When phase hunters materialized near his camp, they observed him for a moment and then disappeared without attacking. "He must have some kind of stealth technology," suggested one of his companions. "Something that makes him invisible to the predators." But had seen clearly. The creatures weren't failing to notice him. They were choosing not to attack him. For reasons she couldn't understand, the most dangerous predators in the galaxy were treating a single human as something they didn't want to confront. As the second night fell, she found herself watching his distant campfire and wondering what kind of species could inspire such caution in creatures that feared nothing else in the known universe. The third day in the Devourer's maze began with an ominous change in the environment. The twisted landscape seemed darker somehow, and the air itself felt heavier. Even the most confident cadets sensed that something was different. Was leading her group through a crystalline canyon when the first Omega Sphinx appeared. The creature materialized out of empty air, existing in too many dimensions for normal vision to process properly. It looked like a massive cat made of shadows and starlight, but its form kept shifting in ways that hurt to observe directly. When it spoke, its voice came from inside their minds rather than through their ears. "Fear," it whispered to them, "show me your fear." Immediately, its royal training began to crumble. The tactical formations that had served her so well suddenly seemed meaningless. Her weapons felt like toys in her hands. The creature wasn't just dangerous, it was impossible. How could anyone fight something that existed partially outside reality? The Sphinx began to project images directly into their minds. Saw herself failing her royal duties, disappointing her family, and being stripped of her rank and title. The visions felt completely real, more real than her actual memories. Two of her companions activated their emergency beacons immediately. The terror was too overwhelming to endure. But worse was coming. Two more Omega Sphinxes appeared, surrounding the group completely. These creatures didn't just hunt for food or territory. They hunted for the pure joy of creating fear and despair in thinking beings. Run managed to gasp. Her royal dignity was forgotten in the face of primal terror. Her group scattered in all directions. The Sphinxes followed, feeding on their panic and growing stronger with each wave of fear they generated. Across the maze, similar scenes were playing out. The legendary hunting packs were being torn apart by creatures that turned their own predatory instincts against them. The alpha predator, who had never shown fear of anything, was running through the forest while screaming incoherently. The Omega Sphinxes had created feedback loops in his mind, artificial hunger sensations that drove him nearly insane. The defensive formations shattered when the Sphinxes attacked from 11 dimensions simultaneously. Their crystalline perfection meant nothing against enemies that could strike from angles that didn't exist in normal space. One by one, the elite cadets began activating their emergency beacons. Species that had dominated galactic warfare found themselves helpless against predators that operated beyond the normal rules of reality. Ran blindly through the twisted landscape, her mind still reeling from the psychic assault. Behind her, she could hear the Omega Sphinxes laughing with voices like breaking glass. They weren't trying to catch her quickly. They were enjoying the hunt too much to end it immediately. She stumbled into a clearing and found herself face to face with an impossible sight. Was walking calmly through the chaos with 3 Omega Sphinxes trailing behind him like obedient pets. The creatures that had shattered the minds of apex predators were following the human peacefully, making no attempt to attack. As watched in shock, one of the Sphinxes moved closer to and attempted to project terror directly into his mind. The same psychic assault that had broken elite warriors across multiple species. Turned and looked directly at the creature. The Sphinx recoiled as if it had been physically struck. Its multidimensional form flickered and became less stable. For the first time in recorded Academy history, an Omega Sphinx showed what could only be described as fear. "Interesting," said quietly, studying the retreating creature. "You're not as scary as you think you are." The other 2 Sphinxes moved away from him, their forms becoming more solid as they put distance between themselves and the human. They seemed confused and uncertain, emotions that Omega Sphinxes were not supposed to possess. Noticed standing frozen in the clearing. He walked over to her casually, ignoring the deadly predators that were now keeping their distance. "Are you hurt?" he asked with what seemed like genuine concern. Stared at him. The most dangerous psychic predators in known space were treating this apparently weak human as something they didn't want to confront. It made no sense according to everything she knew about galactic hierarchies and predator-prey relationships. "How?" she whispered. Followed her gaze to the Omega Sphinxes, who were now hovering at the edge of the clearing like worried observers. "They're bullies," he said simply. "All bullies are the same, no matter what dimension they come from. They pick on people who are afraid of them. When someone isn't afraid, they don't know what to do." "But they're apex psychic predators," protested. "They exist to create fear. How can you not be afraid?" Smiled slightly. "I grew up on Earth," he said. "We have things that are scarier than angry cats from other dimensions." Before could ask what he meant, emergency alarms began echoing through the maze. Not the normal warning sounds, but the specific alarm pattern that meant all personnel should evacuate immediately. "Academy command to all cadets," came Instructor General's voice over their communication devices. "The dread Leviathan has awakened. This is not part of the exercise. All cadets activate emergency beacons immediately. Evacuation ships are en route." Felt her blood turn cold. The dread Leviathan was not a training creature. It was the most dangerous entity the Academy had ever captured, kept in the deepest parts of the maze and never intentionally released. Academy protocols called for the complete evacuation of all personnel when it awakened. The ground began to shake with massive footsteps. Trees in the distance started falling as something enormous moved through the forest toward their position. The Omega Sphinxes, creatures that feared nothing else in existence, immediately fled in all directions. Even they recognized that some things were too dangerous to challenge. "We have to get out of here," said, reaching for her emergency beacon. "Wait," said calmly, "let me see what we're dealing with first." Through the falling trees, the dread Leviathan emerged into view. It was the size of a space station, a creature of living shadow and nightmare that existed primarily to devour reality itself. Its mere presence began warping the landscape around it, turning solid matter into impossible geometries. This wasn't just a predator. It was entropy given form, the literal death of thinking beings made manifest. And it was heading straight toward them. Activated her emergency beacon without hesitation. Nothing in the universe could face the dread Leviathan and survive. But stepped forward, placing himself directly between the approaching monster and the princess. He didn't draw a weapon or activate any technology. He simply stood there and looked up at the creature with those calm, small human eyes. The dread Leviathan stopped. The dread Leviathan had stopped moving. The massive creature that Academy scientists described as the death of thinking beings was simply standing there, looking down at with what appeared to be confusion. Watched in complete shock as the most dangerous entity in known space seemed to hesitate. The Leviathan's reality-warping presence continued to twist the landscape around them, but its attention was focused entirely on the small human who stood calmly in its path. Tilted his head slightly, studying the enormous creature with the same expression he might use to examine an interesting insect. He showed no fear, no tension, no recognition that he was facing something that could erase him from existence with a thought. "You're big," said conversationally, "but you're not really here, are you? Most of you exist somewhere else." The dread Leviathan's form flickered, becoming slightly less solid. For a creature that was supposed to be beyond such concepts, it seemed almost uncertain. "That's the problem with existing in multiple dimensions," continued. "It makes you powerful, but it also makes you incomplete in any single reality. You can't fully commit to anything." The Leviathan began to back away, not retreating exactly, but moving with what looked like reluctance, as if it had encountered something it couldn't categorize or understand. Evacuation ships appeared in the sky above them, their crews preparing to extract any surviving cadets from the maze. Through her communication device, could hear Academy Command coordinating emergency procedures. All available firepower to the Leviathan's position, came one urgent transmission. Prepare reality stabilizers and dimensional anchors. "Negative," replied another voice. "Readings show the entity is retreating. Repeat, the dread Leviathan is withdrawing from cadet positions." Looked up at the approaching ships and waved casually. Then he turned back to, who was still frozen with disbelief. "You should probably let them know you're safe," he suggested, nodding toward her activated emergency beacon. "I don't understand," whispered. "How did you make it retreat? The dread Leviathan has never backed down from anything." Picked up a piece of strange maze debris and examined it thoughtfully. "Fear is a survival mechanism," he explained. "It helps creatures recognize when they're facing something more dangerous than themselves. Most species in the galaxy have become so powerful that they've forgotten what real fear feels like. He tossed the debris aside and met her eyes directly. Humans never had that luxury. The evacuation ship landed nearby. An instructor general emerged with a full squad of armed academy guards. His 4 eyes were wide with amazement as he looked around at the undamaged clearing where and stood. "Cadet," he said carefully, "please explain how you survived an encounter with the dread Leviathan." "I looked at it," replied simply. "Same thing I did with the Omega Sphinxes and the other predators." "That's impossible. The dread Leviathan cannot be intimidated by visual contact." Shrugged. "Maybe it's not intimidation. Maybe it's recognition." His face showed deep confusion. "Recognition of what?" "That humans aren't prey," said quietly. "We're something else entirely." As they boarded the evacuation ship, his communication device buzzed with an urgent message. He listened for a moment, then looked at with an expression of growing comprehension. "Academy Command has received a priority transmission from Earth," he announced. "Your planetary government is forwarding your species complete military assessment and capability reports." He paused, reading from his device. "It seems Earth has been modest about human abilities during the application process." The ship lifted off, carrying them away from the maze. Through the viewport, could see other evacuation vessels collecting the surviving cadets. Many of the galaxy's most elite warriors were being treated for psychological trauma after their encounters with the Omega Sphinxes. "Squadron Omega," continued, "you are being immediately reassigned to the Galactic Defense Forces Special Operations Division upon graduation." "All of us?" Ra asked from across the transport bay. "No," the instructor general replied, his gaze fixed on just the humans. During the flight back to Nexus Prime, found herself sitting next to as he calmly cleaned strange ichor off his boots. The substance was unlike anything she had seen before, suggesting he had encountered creatures that even the Academy didn't know about. "What are you really?" she asked him. Considered the question seriously. "My species calls it persistence hunting," he said eventually. "We evolved as persistence predators. Not the fastest, not the strongest, but we never stop." He looked out at the stars through the viewport. "We learned to survive on a planet that wanted us dead. Everything there was bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we were. So we became something different. We became the thing that other predators check for under the bed." "But you said you were just a trainee," protested. "I am," smiled. "Back on Earth, this would be considered basic survival training. Every human child learns to recognize the difference between predators that hunt for food and predators that hunt for sport." He gestured toward the Academy station growing larger in the viewport. "Your galaxy is full of apex predators who have never really been prey. They've forgotten what it feels like to be hunted by something smarter than they are. And humans remember. Humans are something that apex predators have nightmares about," said quietly. "We're the prey species that learn to hunt back. We're the thing that makes even the monsters afraid." When they docked at Nexus Prime, Academy Command was waiting with a full delegation of military officials from across the galaxy. The humans were immediately separated from the other cadets and escorted to classified briefing rooms. As was led away, he turned back to one last time. "You were right about one thing," he called out to her. "I really am just a trainee." His smile held something that might have been anticipation. "Wait until you meet our instructors." Months later, when the Galactic Defense Force established its new Special Operations Division, the other species would learn what Earth had been quietly preparing for. They would discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was that they had learned to survive in a universe that wanted them dead, and somewhere along the way, they had become the thing that even apex predators feared to face. Princess never forgot the sight of the dread Leviathan backing away from a small human who simply wasn't afraid. She also never forgot's final words about meeting their instructors. Because deep down, she suspected that the Academy had just encountered Earth's equivalent of a basic training graduate, and the real warriors were still coming.